welcome. Today, we want to continue our series of bringing on someone who's actually career relaunched herself to tell you about what worked, what didn't work, and to impart some of her wisdom. So we're introducing today one of our program graduates, Kelly Sullivan, from what part of California?
From LA.
LA.
Yes. Hi, Kel. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Kelly. It's so good to see both of you too. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, we're thrilled.
Yeah.
So why don't we start right at the beginning?
Yeah.
Where were you stumbling before you decided to get some help? What were you doing that wasn't working that made you realize, you know what, I got to figure out a new way to do this?
Sure. Yeah. Well, backing up, I'll start with my background a little bit. So prior to having a child, I was in marketing and advertising for about a decade. And, I decided to leave the workforce when my first son was born. Left a job and a team that I loved to take care of him. And then I had my second son, which extended my break even longer. And during that time that I was home with my kids, I did take some part-time contract work, and that helped keep my skills relevant while allowing me the flexibility that I wanted as a mom. And I also took on a lot of volunteer roles and nonprofit leadership positions. And I really cherished those years because they allowed me to build a strong community for our family and also broaden my experience by trying out different roles, like volunteering in the classroom and leading parent workshops. And I always knew that I wanted to go back to work eventually, but I didn't have a plan or a timeline. So when my youngest son started preschool and both of my kids were in school, it felt like the right time to start pursuing going back to work. But then COVID hit and a few things happened during that time. So one was distance learning. So I had a preschooler and a kindergartner home for about a year, which made everything come to a halt. And then secondly, our family found ourselves in a compromised financial position.
Okay.
And because we were relying on a single income, we had to sell our house and move. And it hit me that we were in a vulnerable situation, and I didn't like that feeling of helplessness. And I knew I was contributing to the family's well-being, but I also wanted to contribute financially too. And I also missed that sense of personal fulfillment that working brought me. So when both of my kids finally returned to school, I felt like it was time to start prioritizing my return to work. But it always seemed like something was getting in the way. It was either my volunteer roles or errands or the kids' activities. And because I wasn't being held accountable, I was always putting that last. And I was always taking care of everyone else. And I was also conflicted, because everything in my life was fine. I was happy with the way that it was going, but I knew that deep down I was craving more. So I think what was really holding me back during that time was, number one, and this is probably the most important, is that I wasn't clear on what I wanted to do next. I knew that my previous jobs that I had didn't allow for much work-life balance. And my priorities and values had changed since becoming a parent. So I was debating whether I should go back to a career in marketing, which I really enjoyed, or completely change paths and explore a career in something like HR or even education, because I had really enjoyed my volunteer work at school so much. So I finally decided that I needed to take some sort of action if I was going to make this happen. And knowing myself, I need structure. So I was trying to figure out, how to put this plan together. So I started talking to people about wanting to go back to work. I think just, saying it out loud sort of realized it a little bit. And then as I was talking to people about this, a friend of mine told me about the Mom Project. So I joined the community and signed up for the emails. And then one day I saw this masterclass called Getting Clear on What You Want, hosted by you two, Susan and Kelly. And I fell in love with you two because you were saying exactly what I needed to hear. It was almost like you had overheard these conversations that I was having with friends and even myself internally. So then I found another class called How to Return to Work After a Long Career Break. And then I just knew that I had to take this class. And I mean, that was the first step that I took, and just
and kudos to you, because I think a lot of people stop where you were earlier and say, well, I should just go back to what I used to do.
Yeah.
Instead of taking the time, you've already taken 8 years off or 10 years off. Why not take a few extra months to really figure out where the right place to go is than to just dive back in?
Well, and I
Right.
think your situation where fear sometimes becomes the
Mhm.
motivator of, well, hold on a second. I don't like this vulnerable feeling of, us financially being where we are, and I want to help contribute or change that. That can be a motivator, but sometimes, and we see this with a lot of students that come to us, it's like you almost need to slow down and do it the right way versus, being perpetuated by that fear of I've got to do the first thing that comes along and be happy because I'm lucky that I even get the position, or I'm trying to help our home finances. And that can really mess with all of that foundational work that you did with your family in the years that you've spent at home with them, that you invested. It can really mess with that when you're, acting off of fear versus really being strategic about what it is that you're doing. So I really commend you, like Susan said, for like slowing it all down and saying like, okay, how can I go about this in a structured way?
Right.
So what was it, do you think, that made you ultimately successful? Because you landed a job pretty shortly after graduating the program.
Yeah. Well, I think, I was reflecting on this quite a bit. And I think, first of all, it was the clarity, because I knew I needed that. How do you look for a job when you don't even know exactly what you want to do? So what I loved, right. And the first section was focused on knowing what you want, right? So I love how the exercises were designed in a way to really take a deep dive. We looked at our values, our strengths, our experiences, and it was hard work, both emotionally and mentally, to go through that. And, I was really having a hard time kind of putting the pieces together of, okay, I'm thinking about doing marketing and HR, even exploring a career in education. What do all of these things have in common? It felt like I was all over the place. But through having these conversations with the group and what I discovered through that process was this common thread was understanding and connecting with people. And I was struggling with the personality test too. And I took it 3 times and I kept getting the helper. And I was like, gosh, I really feel like I should be the achiever or the loyalist. But then that also built on the story, because I think I was struggling because marketing, for example, it's like, well, helper doesn't really fit with that career path. That fits more with education or a social worker or a nurse. And then I realized, well, being a helper, it's like, what drives me at work is helping a team achieve its goals, or, helping that coworker who's buried, or, bringing the team together in some way. So I think, building that story and the exercises really helped put all those pieces together. And then you two really helped us craft that story that was unique to us, which came across in the resume and then the elevator pitch. And I felt so good about that because, I felt like that was going to lead me to a career that really suited me, and that I loved, versus this tension. And it was like this aha moment of what I've been struggling with my whole career. It's like there was this tension between who I thought I should be versus who I really was. And I was like, okay, now I can finally embrace this and talk about it in a way that works for me.
Yeah.
And it worked because you landed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you had a little bit of a shuffle once you landed. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yes. Okay. So,
Well, life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story of resilience and flexibility, which I feel like, you just have to deal with as you're going through this process. And there are some factors that you just can't control. So, well, about 2 months after the graduation, I landed a job, and it was through networking. Ultimately, a former colleague and friend of mine put me in touch with her boss to interview at the company that she was currently at. We had a really great interview. And then I found out a few weeks later that she had actually left and gone to another company. And because I had stayed in touch with her, I feel like something was sort of in the back of my mind telling me to reach out to her. And I did. And it happened to be at the perfect moment. And she said, we're looking for someone to fill this contract position. And I think you would be perfect. So we had an interview. I was hired on as a contractor. And then about 2 months later, I was hired to work full time. And it
Which, by the way, happens about 70% of contract positions. So it's a good thing to consider as a good option.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad that I did that. And it was for a health insurance startup company that I was working for. So everything was going really well. I loved the job, the team. We had just launched this huge project a huge product for the company, excuse me. And, everyone deemed it as very successful. So
yeah,
on cloud nine. And it was just, a few weeks after that product launch, we had a company-wide meeting and the CEO announced that they would be laying off 40% of the company, which is huge. And so found out I was one of them and, had to go back to square one again. But because I had taken,
yeah, you know what, Kel, I want to just put a spotlight on that because we've actually done a series on our YouTube channel about resilience, like bouncing back from rejection or bouncing back from something like a layoff. Can you just talk a little bit about like what was going on for you personally, and then where and how you picked yourself up and got going again?
Yes. Well, it was the first time I'd ever been laid off before. So at first it was such a shock. I kind of just was almost frozen after that call and wasn't quite sure what to do. So a few friends called me after they found out what happened, and it was really nice to be able to just talk through it and lean on my network a little bit. And I kind of just took a couple days to just reflect on everything. But I knew that, what had happened was completely out of my control. And it was due to economic factors and just seeing who got laid off at the company. I knew that it had nothing to do with performance. So I think I just really tried to remove emotion from it, even though it was shocking. It was so disappointing. It was very humbling too. It was like my whole life had changed. I had, gotten childcare and, you change so many things about your life and then it just sort of stops. Have to explain it to your kids what happened and, rearrange all the pieces again. Yeah. But I think it's just because I had all of the tools in place. And because, this was a huge part of it, because I already had this network that I had re-engaged with during the going back to work process. As soon as I shared the news, it was like this flood of people contacting me and wanting to help out. I had so many interviews actually after I had shared the news. It was almost overwhelming, but it was just such a great feeling to know that I had this network, that people truly do want to help you. And then I ended up, right when my job officially ended 2 months later, a friend of mine offered me a position at a nonprofit, and I'm now serving as a marketing director there, and I absolutely love it. And it's even, more flexible than my other job, which turns out to be kind of even better than the situation I was in before.
So maybe a little more fulfilling too, because it feeds that helper side of you.
Completely. Yes. I feel like it really suits my personality and I love the team and I really feel like I'm adding value. So it all ended up working out.
Good.
That's so great. That's so great. So if you could go back and speak to your former self or a woman who's out there right now that's kind of in your shoes where you began this journey, what is like one or two or a couple pieces of advice that you might give or say to her?
Yes. Well, I think this was something that both of you said at one point that really stuck with me. And it's that, companies don't care, what you've done. They care about what you can do now, to an extent. And I feel like I was telling myself this flawed narrative that my skills were outdated. No one's going to want to hire me. But in fact, it's actually the opposite, because I feel like you're coming at this with a fresh perspective, all of this fresh energy too, because you do kind of have a chance to reinvent yourself if you want. And those skills that you had in the past are still there. And I think what really helped was just regaining that confidence. I realized that was what I needed. And I recently just heard this podcast, and it was a quote that really stuck with me, that reminded me of this course. And it's, confidence isn't the result of something. It is, hold on, let me find to this. Confidence isn't the start of something. It's the result of something. Yeah. Susan knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. So it was like just having the support of the group and you and the encouragement over and over and over is like, that is what really built the confidence. You have to work at it. You don't just have it, it is something that you sort of have to do over and over and over, and then you gain that.
Yes.
One thing I want to compliment you on too is that you've really reached back to people who are struggling. Yeah. I'm sure people outside of our program too, that are doing what you did. You haven't forgotten what it felt like to be just starting out. Yeah. And we had one student recently get laid off after working for almost 2 years. And you were one of the first, you don't even know her, but you were one of the first people to reach out to her and say, hey, I know what it feels like. If you want to talk and learn how I bounce back, please let me know. Yeah. So it's great. We appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just having the community of support is so key. And I think when you surround yourself with people that are in the same position and working towards the same goal, there's sort of like the strength in numbers, And
that one thing you said at the very beginning about not really having the accountability, allowing yourself to be always serving others and not taking that time for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. You get that from
right. And
this has been great, Kelly. You've given our audience a lot to think about, some great advice. Yeah. And if you are watching this video and you liked what you've seen, please subscribe to our channel. We put new content out every week. We'll be doing some more interviews with other career relaunchers and providing some other instruction from our own big bag of tricks.
Yes.
You can follow us on www.preparetoLaunchU.com, where you'll find other information. We're on all social outlets. So please find us, engage with us, and let us help you.
Yes. Bye, Kel. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you so much.